Over the years, I've learned one important lesson as a photographer. Always be prepared to look at old work with new eyes. You know how it is, we take the photos, we pick out what we think are the best shots, edit them and then put them out to social media, usually pretty quickly. But what if we were to give those images time? Would the less obvious pictures be the ones that actually resonate with us months or even years later? I was looking to update the images on my website, and I went back to a folder to find a couple of images which I knew I already had and wanted to use, and I came across this picture again. Now, I dismissed it originally probably because it was quite heavily underexposed, but when I looked at it again it caught my eye and I thought, okay, let's have a look at it. So I edited it and I uploaded it to my Leica Photography International gallery. I was somewhat pleased and more than a little surprised to find a couple of days later Leica had awarded it a Master Shot. The image was taken one afternoon in September on the Central Pier in Blackpool. Central Pier as ever was packed with people. When it gets busy like it can do in Blackpool, it's almost impossible to stand off and wait for something to happen. You're almost better off going through the crowds and just reacting to things that you see in front of you. I used a 21mm lens on a Leica M9 for all of these photos, often shooting less than 6 feet from the subject and just looking for gestures and characters. I tend to run the ISO a little hot as well at times just to keep my shutter speed up, and I tend to shoot everything with zone focusing. I tend to do a loop when I'm on the pier, so I go in through the north entrance, work my way around the outside of the pier in one direction and exit via the south entrance. In this case, it was so busy that I ended up moving onto the south side of the pier and crossed to the north side of the pier rather than going all the way round. And it was here where I was confronted with a queue for a chip shop, which was blocking access to the rest of the pier. What I tried to do was push my way through the queue when this young kid turned around. For me, his expression is everything. It's what makes the photograph. The wide-angle lens has kept a lot of the environment in the frame, which gives it context, but it's a purely reactionary moment, taken mid-stride and almost without thinking. Now, if we take a look at the editing of the actual photograph, you can see right from the outset that it is quite underexposed. Now, this is, dare I say it, quite typical of the Leica M9 in sort of very, very heavy backlit situations. Here we've got a massively bright sky, which is obviously taking the metering. Now, I don't mind this because I know that the M9 can bring a lot of detail back in the shadows. And there might be a little bit of noise in those shadows, but that, as I've said before, this doesn't bother me at all. The first thing I do with all of my photographs is set the white balance, even if I'm going to convert it to black and white. Now, I always set the white balance to daylight. It's just much more consistent than trying to do a manual white balance. Then I'll adjust the exposure just to give me the detail that I actually want in the foreground in this case. And then I'll adjust the highlights to bring back all of the sky area. The next thing I'll do is check the color noise reduction. This is really important with black and white photography because if you have color noise in the image, it will look absolutely horrific when the image is converted to black and white. Then I'll just straighten the image up a little bit. This is just my own sort of OCD regarding straight lines. Some people like it on the tilt. I just like to have everything as straight as I can get it with a wide angle lens. And then what I'm going to do is add the black and white profile. So I'm using my SilverChrome Profiles, which I'll link to in the description below, and I'm looking for the one that best suits this image. Now, I use profiles rather than presets because they're much more consistent and they still give me a lot of control over the image once the profile has been applied. I'll adjust the exposure a little bit more with a curve, just lifting the shadow area. And then what I'm going to do is basically dodge and burn the areas which need a little bit more enhancement. So his face, obviously, using a big brush. I always use a big brush. I'm just going to adjust the exposure a little bit on that, and also the clarity to give him a little bit more contrast in his face. And then I'm going to start darkening the areas around him. So in this particular case, we're using, again, a big brush just to give me that sort of hand printed, old school kind of film print look that I'm after with all of my photographs. Now the final thing I'm going to do is add some grain. This does two things. The first thing the grain does is obviously soften the image down a little bit, make it look more film-like, but it also evens out any noise differences between the sky and the foreground, because don't forget, one's correctly exposed and one isn't, so one's going to be noisier than the other. So it's important to add a little bit of grain to even out the actual look of the image, if you like, rather than having a noisy part and a clear part. And that's pretty much it, apart from some odds and sods in Photoshop, just tidying one or two bits and pieces up. The image is pretty much done.